Everybody's got their own story. But there's a third kind of tshuva. We discussed this, the individual sin, repentance over sin.
Yes.
We've discussed the return to a lifestyle, whether it's to return to my ancestors' lifestyle or to return to the lifestyle that I grew up in, or something like that.
Yes,
That is a more enveloping repentance on a personal level.
Yes.
Rabbi Abraham Cook, who some of our viewers might have heard me refer to, and many of our teachers refer to, was the great rabbi of the modern era as far as understanding all of the phenomena that are happening to us differently than it happened in the past.
Okay.
The most obvious of those phenomena is the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, ultimately in order to establish the state of Israel.
Right.
Zionism. This was a break from traditional Judaism, especially since the leaders of Zionism were often non-religious Jews.
Yes.
So for a rabbi to say, I am embracing these Jews and I am joining forces with them in order to establish a Jewish state in the land of Israel.
Yes.
He bucked what all the other rabbis were doing, and he got a lot of flack for it. Except that he was the greatest of all of those rabbis, so he managed to
Ultimately,
to retort to them well. And he
vindicated.
and exactly, he was also vindicated because the fact is that we have the state of Israel today.
Yes.
And it is, again, people have different perspectives of it, but for the followers of Rabbi Cook, it is a vindication of his idea. He had other things that he talked to that went askance of the normal flow of traditional Judaism in those days. For example, perspective on aesthetics, on art. Art was something not for us, but he said, no, art is something very important. Nature, science, all of these things where, whatever, we won't go into Rabbi Cook at this point, but the idea of a nation returning to the land of Israel.
Yes.
For Rabbi Cook, this was called national tshuva.
Gotcha.
This was a repentance not on an individual sin level or even on an individual personal level. This was repentance on a national level. We had sinned in that we perhaps accepted and continued to walk in this exilic framework and social milieu. It is now time for us to do national repentance and return to the normalcy, if I may coin a phrase, the divine normalcy that God wanted us to pursue as an independent, God-seeking nation in the land of Israel. That is again not so frequently thought of when people think of tshuva. And again, if I can quote a quirky comment that often is stated, that tshuva is an orphan, because the non-religious people say, well, tshuva, that sounds like something religious, so that obviously has something to do with the religious people. It's not me, I'm not religious. Mm-hmm. But the religious people say, well, tshuva, it's obviously for the non-religious people because they have to become religious. So who's left doing tshuva? Nobody. So that is, of course, a quirk. And as I described here, everybody has to try to always consider where they are and consider doing a... what was that term? A reconsideration to make sure that you're back. A correction for the way that you're going. And as a nation, This is something that is totally new, that the entire nation is now, as a sum of its parts and more, recognizing God's hand in history and God's place in our lives as both individuals and as a nation. And I may say, and I think that Rav Kook would agree, for the entire world, the entire universe, our entire Earth's entire population is making that correction towards recognizing God in the world and the place of the Jewish people and the land of Israel in the world. And that is the idea of Teshuvah.
Well, very well done. I've got a couple questions I want to ask you,
Sure.
but I want to save them and we'll get them on the next segment. I want to relate his national repentance idea to 2 Chronicles 7:14, and I want to ask him something about Yom Kippur. So when we return, we'll deal with those questions, and hope you'll come back. And until then, shalom.